The Islanders found a hidden gem in the first round of the 2025 NHL Draft when they selected Kashawn Aitcheson 17th overall. It is no secret that the Islanders were huge winners of this year's draft, coming out with a lot of high-tier talent in terms of their prospects. But in the excitement of drafting Mathew Barzal and Victor Eklund, I think there was some excitement lost when it comes to Kashawn Aitcheson and what he can bring to this Islanders team. He is one of the best defensemen who were selected in this draft. Definitely has potential to be the second best defenseman selected in the draft. And because of that, I think the Islanders got a huge steal. And we're going to talk about what's next when it comes to Kashawn Aitcheson's development in this episode of Islanders Digest, because like Schaefer, he has a really interesting decision to make. And while it has lower stakes in terms of the Islanders next season, because it's very unlikely, almost impossible, that Kashawn Aitcheson is going to make the team next year, it definitely can have major implications on his future and how quickly he can come to the NHL. Really quickly, before we get into it, we notice that 65% of you who watch these videos have not yet subscribed to the channel. If you're an Islander fan and you're missing the Islanders, as I am, be sure to subscribe to the channel for more Islanders content just like this. We're going to continue to make Islanders content all summer during the dog days, where there really is not as much going on in the NHL, but still, there's plenty of excitement, especially with the Islanders, considering how many prospects they got in this draft, and really now how many prospects they have in the system. Definitely a lot more exciting things to talk about compared to some other teams that we're going to mention in this video when it comes to really how this happened and how the Islanders were somehow able to land Aitcheson. Now, the update is Aitcheson has a decision to make. Similar to Mathew Barzal, with the rules changing, CHL players are now able to play college, and while we've talked about that being a huge opportunity for Mathew Barzal, it's also perhaps an even bigger opportunity for Kashawn Aitcheson to really go to a level where he can take the next step, as I think he's a player who also does not have much to prove in terms of the OHL. We're going to talk about how good his season was offensively this year, because I think with Aitcheson, there's so much focus, rightfully so, on the physicality and how brutal he is as a hitter. But there's a lot more offense than I expected, especially looking at his stats and taking a little more of a detailed look at his game. I think there's a lot more play driving from defense than people expect from this player. As a result, I think this is an overall steal for the Islanders. I said it at the time, Kashawn Aitcheson was perhaps the player I was less excited about when it came to Victor Eklund and Aitcheson being drafted by the Islanders, but I think that's more just because I was stunned that Victor Eklund was still available at 16 overall, because looking what the Islanders got in Aitcheson, he's a player who has a lot when it comes to offense, in addition to the physicality and the frame he brings to the NHL. Really, when he's ready, he's going to be the full package for the Islanders. And I do think when it comes to Aitcheson, even more so than Schaefer, because the whole thing with Schaefer is if he goes to the OHL, he does have the opportunity to play a couple games in the NHL before the Islanders make that decision. And as a result, it's a more complicated decision, I think, for him, because I do think Schaefer deserves a shot to make this team, to compete with Isaiah George, to see who can make the Islanders. When it comes to Aitcheson, considering that really there's no chance he's going to make the Islanders next season, I think it makes total sense for him to play a season in college and really allow him to play against higher level competition. And for Aitcheson, playing in college is going to really show you what defenseman he's going to be in the future. I think either way, Aitcheson is going to be a very productive defenseman in the NHL. But what's really interesting with Aitcheson is his numbers in terms of offense are a lot more impressive than I initially thought they were. In 64 games played for the Prairie Colts, he had 59 points, 26 goals, which is the number that is really sticking out when you look at Aitcheson and his numbers. For a defenseman, 26 goals is pretty ridiculous. We're going to really quickly show the stats of some other players in the OHL to really give you perspective on how good Aitcheson was offensively. These are the top players in the OHL in terms of defensemen and putting up points, and he is right there in the top 10. This year, he is third in terms of goal scoring in the entire OHL for defensemen, and the two defensemen in front of him, Zane Pariah and Sam Dickinson, are two very highly touted offensive prospects. They're defensemen, but specifically, these are two players that were drafted very high and have very high hopes in the NHL in terms of their offense. You know, Sam Dickinson, he's the player we kind of talked about when we were talking about whether or not it made sense for the Islanders to trade the first overall pick to the San Jose Sharks to move down. They ultimately didn't do that. And Sam Dickinson was a player who, while I wanted him in a trade like that, would have never came realistically to the Islanders. Just provides too much value to the Sharks. And you look at what he provided. Granted, he had way more points than Dickinson, but just look, than Aitcheson. But just looking at the goals, the fact that Aitcheson was able to put up 26 goals compared to 29 and 33, which was the most in the OHL, is really impressive and shows there is a lot of potential for offense with this player, especially when you consider what I'm going to show next. For reference, he also was top 10 in overall points in the OHL. I believe he was 7th overall when it comes to points, so not too shabby either, especially when you consider that this is a player who, compared to Dickinson and I'm not saying these players are one-dimensional players, but Aitcheson has such a bigger element to his game other than just offense than these two players, having his physicality. And it's really impressive that he's all the way up this list with other prospects such as Luca Morelli, who actually played with Callum Ritchie this year on the Oshawa Generals, and I was very impressed with him. To see that Aitcheson was in the same conversation with these players who, keep in mind, all these guys we're talking about are older than Aitcheson, it really is impressive when we talk about these stats and what it means for his future potentially being able to bring offense. And what really grabbed my attention here is that Aitcheson was the top point scorer on his team last year, which really took me off guard. There are really high point numbers in the OHL. Sure, 59 points in 64 games is very impressive, but seeing that he had the most points on his entire team, obviously, if he decides to go to college, which I do think is the best decision for Aitcheson, while I think there's definitely an argument to make with Schaefer, with Aitcheson, especially considering he already played a full season in the OHL last season, I don't think he has much to learn from the league. While I do think he can improve, and it would be cool to see if he can potentially be the #1 scoring defenseman in the OHL, I think it'd be even more impressive to see if he can do it in college. Because if he can do it in college, then I think there's little doubt that Aitcheson is going to bring a lot of offense to his NHL game. Of course, we won't know for sure until he eventually does make the Islanders. With the sample size here, I think a big thing that I'm taking away here is the fact that he was the top point scorer for his team really kind of changes my perspective of the type of offense he was providing for the Prairie Colts. This is a team, the Prairie Colts, that made the playoffs last season, had a good run, actually got eliminated by Callum Ritchie's team. I lost 4 games in a row. Before that, Aitcheson is a player who put up 12 points in the playoffs, and you look at the 59 points he put up, now knowing that that led the team. Of course, there were a couple other players who, I think there was another player who had the same amount of points, and a couple who were in the same conversation as Aitcheson. None of them defensemen, of course. The fact that he was keeping pace and outscoring all the forwards on his team shows you how much of a play driver he is on defense. He's not just a player who's playing on a really good power play and getting carried by several really high-end prospects. Aitcheson had the most points on the team, so he was really driving the majority of these plays, and the fact that he scored 26 goals really shows there's a lot of offensive potential with this player. And looking back at the draft, I'm really trying to understand how he got all the way down to the Islanders. Of course, we weren't talking too much about this range of picks on the channel before the draft happened because it happened so quickly. The Islanders got those 2 picks the day of the draft. And looking back at this board, I don't think the Islanders could have done any better. From an offensive perspective, I would actually argue the only other defenseman who has more potential than Aitcheson, other than Schaefer. And I truly think if the Islanders had not drafted Schaefer, we'd be talking so much more about Aitcheson right now, because this is the 4th defenseman that was picked in this draft. And you look at him, I think the only other defenseman who maybe has more offensive potential is Jackson Smith from the Columbus Blue Jackets, who I think was a really good pick. And just looking back at this draft, I'm really trying to figure out how this even happened for the Islanders. I think it's honestly comical that the Penguins had the 11th and 12th overall picks in this draft, ended up trading one to Philadelphia. And the Islanders draft haul they ended up getting at 16 and 17 is probably better and what Penguins fans expected at 11 and 12. It's really difficult to wrap your head around how well the Islanders did in this draft. Of course, Radim Murta was drafted a little higher, 9th overall, and he's a defenseman who I don't think has as much offensive potential, but because he's so big and he plays the right side, it made sense why he went so high. But still, I'm just so impressed with Kashawn Aitcheson, especially where he came for the Islanders 17th overall. This is a player who, especially considering he has physicality and goal scoring, where there's definitely a really high floor with Aitcheson, where especially with his physicality, even if it doesn't pan out offensively, I think there's still a very effective NHL defenseman in him. But just the fact that he also has the offensive prowess, I'm so excited to see what he does in the future for the Islanders. I'm really hoping he plays a season in college, and then we can see from there where things go with Kashawn Aitcheson. We've seen in recent years that defensemen can move pretty quickly to the NHL, especially after they play a year of college, which is why I'm really hoping Aitcheson does go the college route. But let me know in the comments what you want to see him do. Do you want to see him play another year in the OHL and potentially be the #1 scoring defenseman in the entire league, or would you rather him play college? I think I'm preferring college, but I'd love to know your thoughts below. As always, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel. My name is Patrick Nilan, your host. Catch you on the next episode of Islanders Digest. Let's go Islanders.